The fluorescent hum of the coffee shop was a poor substitute for a functioning nervous system. Emma stared into the dregs of her latte, the milky foam clinging to the ceramic in a pattern that looked suspiciously like a middle finger. It was a fitting omen. In 1 week, her ex-fiancé Mark was marrying the woman he'd left her for. And he had, with the smirking cruelty of a B-list movie villain, invited her. Attending alone felt like admitting defeat, a public surrender she was not prepared to make. Her best friend Chloe had suggested a simple solution: find a date. A ridiculously attractive, charming, impeccably dressed date who would make Mark question every decision he'd ever made. The problem was, men like that didn't exactly grow on the artisanal, ethically sourced trees that lined her neighborhood. Her gaze drifted across the crowded cafe, snagging on a man sitting alone by the window. He wasn't just attractive, he was arresting. He possessed a stillness that seemed to bend the frantic energy of the room around him. Dressed in a dark, tailored coat that looked more like an heirloom than a purchase, he held a book in his hands, though his eyes weren't on the page. They were fixed on the rain-streaked glass, his expression one of contemplative distance, as if he were watching a world to which he only tangentially belonged. His profile was sharp, a sculpture of pale marble and shadow, with dark hair that fell with a kind of careless perfection over his brow. He looked timeless. An old soul, she thought, before her desperation elbowed the poetry aside. He was the one. He was perfect. A wave of nausea, half caffeine and half sheer terror, washed over her. This was insane. You couldn't just walk up to a stranger and proposition them. But the image of Mark's smug face, of his new fiancée's condescending pity, was a more potent fuel than fear. Emma stood up, her chair scraping against the concrete floor with a sound that felt like a starting gun. She smoothed down her dress, took a breath that did nothing to calm the frantic hummingbird in her chest, and walked over to his table. He didn't look up until she was standing directly in front of him, casting a small shadow over his book. When his eyes met hers, they were a surprise, a deep, dark gray, like a storm-tossed sea, and they held an unnerving, ancient intelligence. For a moment, her carefully rehearsed words evaporated. "Can I help you?" His voice was low and smooth, a resonant sound that seemed to vibrate in the air between them. There was no impatience in it, only a calm, waiting curiosity. Emma swallowed, forcing the words out before she could lose her nerve. "This is going to sound crazy," she began, her voice a little too high. "And you have every right to say no, or to call security, or to just laugh in my face. But I am in a desperate situation, and you look capable." A flicker of amusement, subtle as a candle flame in a breeze, touched the corner of his mouth. "Capable," he repeated, the word tasting strange and interesting on his tongue. "Yes," she pressed on, gathering momentum. "My ex is getting married. I have to go. I cannot go alone. So, my proposition is this. Be my wedding date. For 1 night. I will pay you $500, cash. Plus a new tie if you need one. You just have to stand there, look handsome, which you seem to have covered, and pretend you're completely besotted with me," she finished, breathless, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. She was already mentally drafting her apology, planning her escape route, when he finally spoke. "And what, precisely, does being besotted entail?" he asked, a genuine curiosity lacing the deep timbre of his voice. The question was so unexpected, so practical, that it broke the tension. A small, shaky laugh escaped her. "Oh, laughing at my jokes, even the bad ones? Holding my hand so my knuckles don't turn white. Getting me a drink when my cousin Carol starts talking about her holistic dog food startup. And looking at me in a way that makes my ex want to spontaneously combust." He considered this for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. She felt pinned by it, seen in a way that was both unnerving and oddly thrilling. He closed his book, the soft thud of the cover echoing in the small space between them. $500 is quite generous, he said, his tone smooth as polished stone. But unnecessary. The novelty of the experience will be payment enough. Emma blinked. You'll do it? For free? I didn't say for free, he corrected gently. I said the experience would be payment. My name is Julian, he extended a hand. It was cool to the touch, his grip firm and steady. There was a strange sense of solidity to him, as if he were rooted to the very core of the earth. Emma, she breathed, feeling a dizzying rush of relief. Thank you, seriously. You have no idea. Oh, I think I have some idea, Julian said, and the corner of his mouth lifted again, a slow, magnetic smile that did devastating things to her composure. Desperation can be a powerful motivator. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, she felt like this wasn't just a business transaction. There was something else in his gaze, something ancient and lonely, that seemed to recognize a flicker of the same in her. He had no way of knowing how right he was. He also had no idea that his quiet, incognito existence was about to be interrupted by a chaotic human wedding, an event he hadn't willingly attended in over a century. For Julian, an ancient vampire who had once ruled a council of his kind centuries ago, but had abdicated to live in solitude, this was a distraction, a brief and amusing foray into the fleeting, vibrant world of mortals. He thought it would be simple. He had no idea how wrong he was. The week leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of anxious planning and 3 surprisingly normal preparatory meetings. They met for coffee each time, or rather, she had coffee while he had water and black coffee, which he sipped minimally. When she asked about it the second time, he explained smoothly that he had a restrictive medical condition requiring him to eat at specific times for blood sugar control. It sounded plausible enough, and she was too stressed to probe further. He was an enigma, offering little about himself beyond a vague mention of working in acquisitions, specializing in rare artifacts and historical documents. It sounded impossibly sophisticated, and explained the timeless elegance that clung to him like a second skin. He listened more than he spoke, his dark gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel like the most fascinating person in the world. He asked about the wedding party, the key players in her personal drama, memorizing names and relationships with an effortless precision that was both impressive and slightly unnerving. During their third meeting, they rehearsed their cover story. They'd met at an art gallery opening 3 months ago, bonded over a shared love of classic cinema, and had been seeing each other ever since. He was, she decided, a professional. A man who took his commitments seriously, even one as bizarre as this. When he arrived at her apartment on the evening of the wedding, she was unprepared for the full effect. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that made him look less like a hired date and more like the dark hero of a gothic romance. He didn't knock. She simply felt his presence on the other side of the door a moment before her doorbell chimed, a soft, unobtrusive sound. "You look," he began, his voice a low murmur as she opened the door, and then he paused, his gaze sweeping over her in her emerald green dress. Stunning. The word, spoken with such simple, unadorned sincerity, sent a jolt of warmth through her. "You're not so bad yourself," she managed, trying for levity. "You'll definitely make Mark jealous." "That is the objective," Julian said, but the look in his eyes felt far more personal than a contractual obligation. The venue was a sprawling, opulent estate, dripping with white roses and fairy lights, a monument to Mark's sudden windfall from a tech startup acquisition and his fiancée's saccharine taste. As they walked in, a hush seemed to follow them. Julian moved with a liquid grace, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, a gesture that felt both proprietary and profoundly reassuring. Every head turned. She could feel Mark's eyes on them from across the room, and for the first time all night, she felt a genuine, triumphant smile spread across her face. Julian was flawless. He navigated the social minefield with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. He charmed her great-aunt Mildred, discussed obscure financial models with her Uncle Robert, and listened to Cousin Carol's dissertation on gluten-free kibble with an expression of rapt attention. He never left her side, his presence a warm, solid anchor in a sea of awkward conversations and pitying glances. When they danced, he held her as if she were made of spun glass, guiding her through the steps with an ease that suggested he'd been dancing in rooms like this for a very, very long time. "Having an acceptable time?" he murmured, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. "More than acceptable," she admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "It's easy with you here." "Good," he said simply. "That is also the objective." The moment of truth arrived when Mark and his new bride, Tiffany, made their way over to their table. Mark's smile was tight, his eyes flicking from Emma to the man beside her. "Emma, glad you could make it," he said, the words dripping with false sincerity. "Wouldn't miss it," she replied, her voice steady. Julian's hand found hers under the table, his thumb stroking her knuckles in a slow, calming rhythm. "And this is?" Mark prompted, his gaze sharp and assessing. Before she could speak, Julian stood, his movements fluid and unhurried. He was taller than Mark, his presence more commanding. Julian Thorne, a pleasure. He shook Mark's hand, his grip firm. He didn't smile, but his expression was one of polite, unassailable confidence. "Julian and I have been seeing each other for a while," Emma added, the lie slipping out more easily than she'd expected. It didn't even feel like a lie. In the strange, insulated bubble of the evening, it felt true. Tiffany's perfectly glossed lips formed a small O of surprise. "Oh, well, it's so lovely to meet you." The conversation was stilted and brief, but the effect was undeniable. Mark looked unsettled, his carefully constructed facade of blissful happiness cracking at the edges. When they finally moved on, Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said, looking up at Julian. The gratitude was so immense it felt heavy in her chest. "You were perfect." "You give me too much credit," he said, his gaze soft. "I merely provided the frame. You are the masterpiece." Later, standing on the terrace overlooking the manicured gardens, the distant sound of music washing over them, the air grew thick with a different kind of tension. The performance was over. The night was winding down. "I can't believe it's almost over," she said, leaning against the cool stone balustrade. "I feel like I should be giving you an Oscar, not $500. "As I said, the payment is unnecessary," he reminded her. "I can't let you do this for free," she insisted, turning to face him. "It's not right." "Then don't consider it free," he said, stepping closer. The space between them shrank until she could feel a faint coolness radiating from him, a stark contrast to the humid night air. "Consider it an investment." "An investment? In what?" "In another evening," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Have dinner with me next week. A real dinner. No ex-fiancés, no paying audience, just you and me." Her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't part of the deal. The deal was supposed to end when the night did. But the thought of not seeing him again, of this incredible, effortless connection simply vanishing, left a hollow ache in her chest. She started, unsure of what to say. "Just dinner, Emma," he said, his expression softening. "I find myself curious." Curiosity. It was the same word he'd used when she first approached him. She looked into his dark, unreadable eyes and realized she was just as curious about him, about the man who could command a room without raising his voice, who listened with his entire being, and who made a fake relationship feel more real than anything she'd had with Mark. "Okay," she heard herself say, the word a quiet promise in the night air. "Yes, I'd like that." A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, unguarded expression that lit his features from within. "Good. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something beyond his calm, controlled exterior. It looked like hope, and it was a far more valuable currency than anything she could have offered him. As he drove her home, the comfortable silence in the car was filled with the unspoken acknowledgement that something had shifted. The line between pretense and reality had not just blurred, it had dissolved entirely. Their first real date was a week later. Julian had suggested a small, intimate restaurant tucked away on a side street she'd never noticed before, a place that seemed to exist out of time. It was all dark wood, flickering candles, and hushed conversations. True to form, he was already there when she arrived, seated at a secluded corner table. The city was sinking into twilight outside, the streetlights just beginning to cast a golden glow on the damp pavement. He rose as she approached, a small, courteous gesture that felt charmingly old-fashioned. "You're punctual," he observed, a hint of approval in his tone. "You're early," she countered, sliding into the chair he held for her. "I'm beginning to think you don't believe in being fashionably late." "I believe in not wasting time," he replied, his gaze steady, "especially when it's time spent with you." The compliment was delivered so matter-of-factly that it took her a moment to process. It wasn't a line, it was a statement of fact, and it made her cheeks warm. The evening unfolded with the same effortless grace as the wedding. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing as easily as the wine, or her wine. Julian, once again, ordered a glass of water and black coffee, taking small, measured sips. When the waiter came to take their food order, he politely declined. "I ate earlier," he said, a simple explanation that she accepted without a second thought. She was too caught up in the rhythm of their conversation, in the way he listened, his head tilted slightly, his entire focus on her. He had a way of asking questions that unspooled the tangled threads of her thoughts, making her talk about her dreams, for her small graphic design business, her complicated relationship with her family, her love for old black and white movies. He, in turn, remained a beautifully crafted enigma. He spoke of travels to cities she'd only read about, Prague, Kyoto, St. Petersburg, describing them with a startling, sensory detail that made it feel as though he'd walked their streets 100 years ago. She noticed other things, too, small oddities that pricked at the edge of her awareness. All of their dates, without exception, took place after sunset. When she'd suggested a weekend hike, he deftly steered the conversation toward a late-night jazz club instead. He never seemed to feel the cold, standing comfortably in the crisp autumn air in just his suit jacket while she bundled herself in a scarf. And then there was the food. He never, ever ate or drank more than water or black coffee in her presence. It became a quiet, unacknowledged pattern. A month of evening meetings, of moonlit walks and late-night galleries, and she had never once seen him consume anything substantial. One evening, as they walked along the river, the city lights shimmering on the dark water, she decided to gently probe. "You must have the metabolism of a hummingbird," she teased. "We've been on, 6 dates? And I'm the only one who ever eats? Are you on some kind of extreme diet?" He didn't miss a beat. "Something like that," he said, his voice smooth. "I have a restrictive medical condition that requires eating at very specific times for blood sugar control. It's easier to simply eat before or after our time together." "Allergic to everything?" she pressed lightly, remembering his earlier excuse. He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "The condition makes it complicated. Easier to manage privately. Does it bother you, Emma?" The question was direct, his gaze searching. And she found, to her own surprise, that it didn't. "No," she said honestly. "It's a little strange, but you're a little strange. I think it's one of the things I like about you." His shoulders seemed to relax, a subtle release of tension she hadn't even noticed he was carrying. "I'm glad," he said, his voice softer than before. From Julian's perspective, every moment with her was a high-wire act. He, who had commanded armies and advised monarchs, found himself utterly terrified of a simple question from a mortal woman with eyes the color of warm honey. He had existed for centuries, a creature of shadow and silence, his loneliness a vast, unchanging ocean. He had learned to move through the human world as a ghost, an observer, never a participant. But with Emma, he felt the long, dormant pull of connection, a warmth seeping into the ancient frost of his soul. Her laughter was a physical thing, a light that seemed to chase away the shadows. Her boldness, the very quality that had brought her to his table in that coffee shop, delighted him. She was so unapologetically alive. He found himself relearning the world through her eyes. The taste of coffee, which he could not drink, was conveyed in the pleased sigh she let out after the first sip. The joy of a sunny day, which he could not feel on his skin, was reflected in the bright energy it gave her. He was falling for her, and the realization was both a profound joy and a terrifying burden. The secret of his nature was a chasm between them. Every easy conversation, every shared laugh, every light touch was predicated on a lie of omission. He saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes when he refused food, the slight furrow in her brow when he could only ever meet her at night. He saw her notice, and he saw her choose to trust him anyway, to dismiss the inconsistencies because the connection between them felt more real than the questions they raised. And every time she did, the guilt twisted inside him, a cold, sharp thing. When should he tell her? How could he explain a truth that belonged to nightmares and legends? The fear of her reaction, of seeing the warmth in her eyes curdle into terror and revulsion, was a constant, icy dread. He could lose her. The thought was more frightening than any threat he had faced in his 1,000 years of existence. He was an ancient vampire, a creature of immense power, and he had never felt so utterly powerless. He was caught in a paradox. The closer he grew to her, the more he cherished her, the more catastrophic the inevitable revelation became. The night he decided to tell her, a cold, clear winter evening, felt charged with significance. He had invited her to his home for the first time. It wasn't a grand, Gothic castle, but a spacious penthouse apartment in a restored pre-war building, the kind of place that whispered of old money and quiet history. The interior was minimalist and masculine, dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panorama of the city's glittering, nocturnal skyline. There were no personal photographs, but the walls were lined with shelves of books, leather-bound first editions standing shoulder to shoulder with modern paperbacks, and the art on the walls was eclectic and undeniably authentic. An intricate Japanese woodblock print, a moody Dutch landscape, a starkly modern abstract canvas. Emma moved through the space with a quiet awe, running her fingers along the spines of the books. "This place is incredible, Julian. It feels like a museum." "It's just a collection of things I've acquired over the years," he said, his voice tight. He hadn't planned for it to be tonight, but as he watched her, so vibrant and alive in his silent, sterile home, he knew he couldn't maintain the facade any longer. It was an insult to her, to the genuine thing that was growing between them. She deserved the truth, no matter the cost. "Emma," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. She turned, a curious smile on her face, and it faltered when she saw his expression. "What is it? You look like you're about to deliver terrible news." He gestured to the large leather sofa facing the windows. "Please, sit down." A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She sat, her hands clasped in her lap. He remained standing, pacing before the vast expanse of glass like a caged panther, the city lights reflecting in his dark eyes. "There is something I should have told you from the beginning," he began, his back to her. "Something you need to know about me. I delayed because I am a coward. I was afraid of losing the possibility of you before it even had a chance to begin." He turned to face her, his expression etched with a profound, weary sadness. "Everything we have shared has been real, My feelings for you are real, but my life, my existence, is built on a foundation you cannot possibly imagine." Her heart began to beat a frantic, panicked rhythm. "Julian, you're scaring me." He walked over and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. They were as cool as ever, but his grip was gentle, almost pleading. He looked directly into her eyes, and she saw centuries of loneliness swirling in their gray depths. "I need you to listen," he said, his voice low and steady, "and to try, if you can, not to be afraid. I will not harm you. I would sooner cease to exist than cause you any harm." He took a deep, unnecessary breath. "You've noticed that I am different, that we only meet at night, that I never eat or drink beyond water or coffee?" Her mind raced, connecting the dots she had so carefully ignored. Always night, never eating, never drinking. His unnatural stillness, his old-fashioned grace. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture that was wild, impossible, and terrifyingly logical. "The reason for these things," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "is because I am not human." The air left her lungs in a silent rush. The city noise outside, the hum of the refrigerator, everything faded into a dull, roaring silence. "What are you saying?" she breathed, though she already knew. He held her gaze, his own filled with a terrible vulnerability. "I am a vampire." The words hung in the air between them, stark and unbelievable. A vampire? It was a word from movies, from books, a creature of fantasy and fiction. It couldn't be real. It couldn't be Julian, the man who listened so intently, who made her feel so safe, who looked at her with such undisguised tenderness. She pulled her hands from his, a reflexive, instinctive motion. A flicker of deep, profound pain crossed his face, a wound more fatal than any stake. He didn't move, didn't try to touch her again. He simply knelt there, waiting, giving her the space she needed to shatter. Her first reaction was a wild, hysterical laugh that bubbled up and died in her throat. "That's not funny, Julian. If this is some kind of elaborate joke—" "It is not a joke," he said, his voice utterly devoid of humor. The finality in his tone silenced her. This was real. He believed what he was saying. And as she looked at him, truly looked at him, past the handsome face and the elegant suit, she saw it. The profound, unearthly stillness. The ancient sorrow in his eyes. The subtle, predatory grace in his posture even when kneeling. The clues she had so easily dismissed now reassembled themselves into an undeniable, terrifying truth. "How?" she whispered, the question encompassing everything. "How old are you? How is this possible? How have you lived among us?" "I was born in the 11th century," he said, his voice a low, somber recitation. "I have lived for nearly 1,000 years. I have watched empires rise and fall, watched the world change in ways my human mind could never have conceived. And I have done it mostly alone." 1,000 years. The number was incomprehensible, a weight of time that she couldn't begin to fathom. She thought of her own small life, her 28 years of worries and joys, and it felt like a flicker of a matchstick in the face of his eternal bonfire. "So, the stories, are they true?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The blood?" He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, it is what sustains me. But I need you to understand, I do not hunt humans. I have arrangements with private blood banks, donated blood from willing sources, obtained legally and ethically. My kind has evolved. We've found ways to exist without causing harm." She stood up and walked to the window, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She needed the solid glass against her back, the familiar glittering cityscape to anchor her. A vampire. Her boyfriend, the man she was falling in love with, was a vampire. She thought of the wedding, of his hand at her back, his easy charm. She thought of their dates, the long conversations, the way he made her feel seen and cherished. How could that man be this creature of the night? But he was. The logic was inescapable. The pieces fit. His aversion to sunlight, his lack of appetite, his quiet, timeless wisdom. It wasn't a quirk, it was his nature. He hadn't lied to her, not with words. He had simply omitted the most fundamental truth of his existence. He remained where he was, giving her silence, giving her time. He didn't try to persuade her or placate her. He was letting her feel it all, the shock, the fear, the disbelief. He was respecting her reaction, even if it meant she would walk out that door and never look back. And that, more than anything, began to cut through the terror. The man she knew was still there. The patient, respectful, gentle man was kneeling on the floor, his heart, or whatever passed for it, exposed and waiting for her verdict. She turned back to face him. "Why tell me now?" "Because I am falling in love with you, Emma," he said, the words raw and honest. "And love cannot exist on a foundation of secrets. You deserve to know who you are spending your time with, who you are allowing into your life. You deserve to make a choice, an informed choice." A choice. That word resonated deep within her. He wasn't trapping her or tricking her, he was freeing her. He was risking the only real connection he'd felt in centuries, for the sake of her autonomy. The fear began to recede, replaced by a strange, breathtaking clarity. What mattered more? The impossible, terrifying label of what he was, or the undeniable, tangible reality of who he had been with her? He had been her protector at the wedding, her confidant on their dates, her steadfast, gentle companion. His actions had spoken a truth louder than any single shocking word. He had shown her nothing but kindness, respect, and a deep, abiding care. She took a moment, standing by the window, her mind racing through everything. Then she asked the question that had been forming. "Could you ever lose control and hurt me?" His expression became even more serious. "My age gives me complete control," he said quietly. "I have centuries of mastery over my nature. Younger vampires struggle with control, but for me, the impulse is entirely manageable. I keep distance from humans as a precaution, a principle I've held for a very long time. But with you, Emma, I have never felt even the slightest threat of losing that control. You are not in danger from me." The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction, settled something in her chest. Slowly, deliberately, she walked back to him. He watched her approach, his expression a mask of tense anticipation. She stopped in front of him, looking down into his upturned face. She saw the fear there, the raw vulnerability of a man brought to his knees, not by a rival, but by the potential rejection of a mortal woman. Reaching out, her hand shaking slightly, she gently touched his face. His skin was cool and smooth, like marble, but it was solid. Real. He closed his eyes at her touch, a shudder running through his still frame. It wasn't a touch of passion, but of acceptance. A bridge across the chasm of 1,000 years and 1,000 secrets. "Okay," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Okay, Julian." It wasn't a declaration of undying love. It wasn't a promise of forever. It was just acceptance. A choice to see the man, not the monster. A choice to believe in what she felt, not what she feared. For Julian, who had expected screams, tears, and a final echoing slam of the door, her quiet touch, her simple accepting word, was a salvation he hadn't dared to hope for. The immense weight of his secret, a burden he had carried for centuries, finally lifted, and in its place was the fragile, terrifying, and beautiful beginning of a love built on the most impossible of truths. But Emma wasn't finished with her questions. She pulled back slightly, her hand still on his face, and asked, "What about the sun? You said we can only meet at night. How dangerous is it really? He took her other hand, holding both gently. Even indirect sunlight causes me pain within minutes, he explained. Full exposure would cause severe burns within an hour, and could be fatal with prolonged contact. It's not instantaneous death like the myths say, but it is agonizing and extremely dangerous. That's why all our time together must be after sunset. Even twilight is uncomfortable for me. She nodded slowly, processing. And this life, if I were to... She trailed off, but he understood. If you were to become like me, he said carefully, you would face the same limitations. But that is a conversation for another time, if you want to have it at all. For now, what matters is that you know the truth. She managed a small, shaky smile. I think I've absorbed enough truth for one night. He returned her smile, the relief in his expression palpable. Then let us simply be here, together, with honesty between us. She nodded and pulled him up from his kneeling position, leading him to the sofa. They sat together, and for the first time, the silence between them was not filled with unspoken secrets, but with a new, fragile understanding. The days that followed his revelation were a strange mix of the mundane and the miraculous. Their relationship, which had been developing under the shadow of a monumental secret, was now bathed in the stark, clarifying light of truth. Emma was filled with a million questions, and Julian answered every one with unwavering patience and honesty. They would sit for hours in his apartment, the city lights a silent audience, as he unspooled the tapestry of his long life. He told her of witnessing the construction of cathedrals that were now ancient ruins, of speaking languages that were long dead, of the profound, crushing loneliness that had been his only constant companion. He explained the rules of his existence. Sunlight was not instantly fatal, as myths suggested, but it was agonizing, weakening him and burning his skin over time, and prolonged exposure could kill him. He possessed strength and speed far beyond human limits, but he was not invincible. Silver could harm him, though not as dramatically as legends claimed, and a stake through the heart would indeed be fatal, as would decapitation or severe blood loss. And his kind did not sleep. Instead, they entered a state of quiet stillness, a conscious rest where they processed the endless accumulation of memories. He fed on donated blood from private blood banks, maintaining ethical arrangements that allowed him to sustain himself without hunting. Listening to him, Emma began to understand that his immortality was not a gift, but a sentence. A sentence of watching everyone he ever cared for wither and die, of seeing the world perpetually change while he remained the same. Her heart ached for the lonely boy who had been made a monster, and for the solitary man who had learned to endure it. Her acceptance gave him a new kind of life. For the first time in centuries, he was not just an observer of the human world, he was a participant in it, anchored by her. He began to share the small joys of her mortal life. He couldn't eat the popcorn, but he would sit with her through her favorite black and white films, offering commentary from the perspective of someone who had actually been alive when they were made. He couldn't feel the warmth of a fire, but he would watch her face, transfixed by the way the flames danced in her eyes. He learned the names of her friends, the intricacies of her work projects, the rhythm of her daily life. He was fascinated by the fleeting, beautiful chaos of her humanity. One evening, as they sat on her small balcony, wrapped in blankets against the winter chill, she looked over at him. "Does it make you sad?" she asked quietly. "Watching me? Knowing that I'll, you know." He turned his gaze from the stars to her. "It is the greatest sadness of my existence," he admitted, his voice low. "Every moment with you is precious, Emma, but it is also finite, a beautiful, brilliant flash in my endless night. The thought of that light going out, it is a pain I am not sure I can endure again." She saw the raw truth of it in his eyes, the accumulated grief of 1,000 years of loss. It was a weight she couldn't comprehend, but one she was now inextricably a part of. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I'm not going anywhere for a long time, Julian." "A long time for you is a breath to me," he said, his voice laced with a gentle sorrow. He brought her hand to his lips, his touch reverent. "Which is why there is something else we must discuss." He hesitated, and she knew this was as difficult for him as his initial confession. "I have the ability," he began slowly, choosing his words with immense care, "to offer you what I have. To stop the clock for you, as it was stopped for me. To give you eternity." The air grew still. Eternity. The word was vast and terrifying. To never grow old, to never get sick, to never die. But also, to never see her family again, to watch all her friends fade away, to leave her sunlit, mortal world behind for his world of shadows. But before she could spiral into panic, he continued. "I need you to understand what that means," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "The transformation takes 3 days and is extremely painful. Your body would die and be reborn into this form. You would need to disappear from your mortal life entirely. Your family would have to believe you died. You could never see them again, never walk in the sun, never eat human food. You would need blood to survive, though I would teach you how to obtain it ethically. And you would live forever, watching the world change, watching everyone you know now grow old and die while you remain the same." His honesty was brutal and compassionate at once. He was laying out the full cost, hiding nothing. "But I am not asking you," he said quickly, seeing the conflict in her eyes. "I am telling you that the option exists. It is a choice that would change everything about you, and it is a choice that must be yours and yours alone. There would be no pressure from me. Not now, not ever. If you choose to live out your natural life, I will cherish every single second I have with you, and I will be grateful for that gift. Your timeline, Emma. Your choice. Always." His words were the ultimate act of love. He was offering her everything, with no expectation of her accepting it. He was giving her complete and total agency over her own destiny, even if her choice meant he would one day face the agony of losing her. He was prioritizing her freedom above his own desire to keep her forever. Tears welled in her eyes, not of fear, but of overwhelming love and gratitude. In that moment, he was not a vampire, not a creature of legend. He was just Julian, the man who saw her, respected her, and loved her enough to let her go. "I can't answer that now," she whispered, her voice thick. "It's too much to think about." "I know," he said, stroking her cheek with the back of his fingers. "And you don't have to. We have tonight, and tomorrow night, and as many nights as you want." She leaned into his touch, a sense of peace settling over her. Their future was a vast, unknown country, with paths leading to both sunlight and shadow. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the dark. She had a guide, a partner. An ancient vampire who had abdicated his loneliness for the sake of her heart. Their love story hadn't started with a fairy tale once upon a time, but with a bizarre business proposition in a coffee shop. It had blossomed through a fake wedding, deepened over one-sided dinners, and survived a truth that should have torn them apart. Now it was something more. It was a partnership built not on fantasy or fate, but on honesty, respect, and the profound, beautiful power of choice. She didn't know if she would choose eternity. But she knew, with every fiber of her being, that she had already chosen him. And for now, that was more than enough. Their life together began to take on a new rhythm, a delicate dance between her world and his. By day, Emma lived her life. She met friends for brunch, worked on design projects in her sun-drenched apartment, and walked through parks feeling the grass beneath her feet. But she found herself looking forward to the sunset with an eagerness she'd never known, for twilight was when her two worlds merged. Julian, in turn, found a new purpose in her mortal routines. He would wait for her, watching from his window as the last rays of sun bled from the sky, a quiet anticipation humming within him. He learned to appreciate the world through her descriptions, the specific shade of blue in the midday sky, the taste of a new recipe she'd tried, the scent of rain on hot asphalt. He became a silent partner in her business, his centuries of observing human aesthetics and commerce providing surprisingly sharp insights into her branding projects. He had an unerring eye for balance and a deep understanding of what resonated with people, qualities that had served him well in his long existence and now served to help her land a major client. Her friends, particularly Chloe, were mystified. They saw the profound change in her. The lingering sadness from her breakup with Mark had vanished, replaced by a quiet, radiant confidence. "I don't get it," Chloe said one afternoon, stirring sugar into her iced tea. "This Julian guy, he's perfect. He's gorgeous, he's brilliant, he treats you like a queen. But he's also a total ghost. No social media, no pictures, and he only ever comes out at night. Is he a spy? Or in witness protection?" Emma felt the weight of the secret press against her chest. She wanted to tell Chloe, to share this monumental truth with her best friend. But it wasn't her secret alone. It was Julian's existence, his safety. "Something like that," she said, echoing Julian's own evasiveness. She saw the flicker of hurt in Chloe's eyes at being shut out, and it created a small fissure in their friendship. That evening, she told Julian about the conversation. "I almost told her," she admitted. "It felt wrong to lie to my best friend." He took her hand, his expression understanding. "The secret is a burden," he said gently. "I know that. And it creates distance between you and the people you love. If you feel you must tell her, I will not stop you. But understand that once the truth is spoken, it cannot be taken back. And it would put her in a position of carrying a secret that could endanger both of us if it spread." Emma nodded slowly, understanding the weight of it. "The secret isn't mine alone to share," she said finally. "And I chose this, chose you, chose this life. I'll find a way to navigate it. But it means there's a part of my life Chloe can't be part of anymore." Julian squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry for that loss," he said sincerely. "The cost of loving me is higher than it should be." But their peace was not to last. 3 months into their honest relationship, Julian came to her apartment one evening with a tension in his shoulders she'd never seen before. His usual calm was fractured, replaced by a coiled, dangerous energy. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, setting down her sketchbook. "We have a problem," he said, his voice low. "Someone from my past has arrived in the city, another vampire. His name is Victor, and he was part of the council I once led. He's not pleased that I've been living in isolation, and he's even less pleased that I've taken a human companion." The word companion sounded too gentle for the possessive rage Julian described. "Victor believes humans are beneath us," he continued, pacing her small living room like a caged animal. "He sees your presence in my life as a weakness, a betrayal of our kind. And he's made it clear that he intends to address the situation." Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her. "Address the situation? What does that mean?" "It means you're in danger," Julian said bluntly, turning to face her. "Victor is old, powerful, and he has no regard for human life. He sees you as a problem to be eliminated. I won't let that happen." He crossed to her in 2 strides, taking her shoulders in his hands. "I am taking you somewhere safe. Tonight. You'll stay there until I've dealt with Victor." "No," Emma said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm not hiding while you face this alone." "What if he hurts you? What if—" "He can't," Julian interrupted, a grim smile touching his lips. "I am older than Victor, and far stronger. But he is cunning, and he will use you against me if he can. Your safety is my priority. Please, Emma, let me protect you." She saw the desperation in his eyes, the fear that was entirely for her. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but you come back to me, Julian. You promise me." "I promise," he said, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted of fierce determination and barely controlled fear. He took her to a safe house on the outskirts of the city, a nondescript building with reinforced doors and windows that could withstand a siege. Two of Julian's trusted allies, other vampires who had remained loyal to him, stood guard. She spent 3 agonizing days there, pacing and worrying, with no word from Julian. On the 3rd night, he finally returned. He was unharmed, but looked exhausted in a way she'd never seen, a weariness that seemed to pull at his very essence. "It's done," he said simply, pulling her into his arms. "Victor has been dealt with. He's agreed to leave the city and leave us alone." "What did you do?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "I reminded him why I was once his leader," Julian said, his voice hard. "And I made it clear that any threat to you would be met with the full extent of my power. He won't trouble us again." But holding him, feeling the tension slowly drain from his body, Emma understood something fundamental. This would not be the last threat. Julian's world was one of ancient rivalries, power struggles, and creatures who saw humans as prey or pawns. Loving him meant living in the crosshairs of that world. And she had to decide if she could bear it. The incident with Victor changed something in her. The abstract danger of Julian's nature became concrete and terrifying. She realized that as long as she remained human, she would always be his vulnerability, the weakness his enemies would exploit. One rainy April evening, about 6 months after they had met, they were in his apartment, the sound of the storm a rhythmic drumming against the panoramic windows. Emma was curled on the sofa, sketching in a notebook, while Julian stood watching the tempest, his reflection a faint, ghostly image on the glass. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked suddenly. He turned to her, his brow furrowed. "Miss what?" "The sun," she said, "feeling it on your skin. Seeing a sunrise." His expression softened with a melancholy that seemed to pull at the very air in the room. "I remember it," he said, his voice distant. "I remember the warmth, the way it made the colors of the world seem brighter. I remember the scent of a summer morning. I carry the memory of it, but the sensation is lost to me. It is a phantom limb. I know it was once there, but I can no longer feel it." His words painted a picture of such profound loss that it took her breath away. To live without the sun was to live in a world that was permanently half-formed. She closed her sketchbook and went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind and resting her head against his back. He was cool, as always, but he was solid and real beneath her touch. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He placed his hands over hers. "Do not be. It is my nature. But," he added, his voice dropping, "being with you, it is like feeling a different kind of warmth, a different kind of light." She tightened her embrace, pressing her face against the fine material of his shirt. It was in moments like this, moments of shared vulnerability and quiet intimacy, that the choice became both harder and simpler. To become like him would mean sharing his exile from the sun, but it would also mean never having to leave his side. It would mean an eternity of rainy nights like this, of quiet conversations and unspoken understanding. And it would mean she would no longer be the weakness his enemies could exploit. "I'm not ready to decide," she said, her voice muffled against his back. "But I'm thinking about it more seriously now. After Victor, I realized I'll always be your vulnerability as long as I'm human." He turned in her arms to face her, his hands coming up to cup her face. His thumbs traced the line of her jaw, his touch infinitely gentle. "You are not a weakness, Emma," he said fiercely. "You are my strength. You are the reason I have something to fight for after centuries of simply existing. Whether you choose mortality or immortality, that will never change. There is no timeline," he repeated the promise that had become the cornerstone of their love. "Whether you have 70 years or 7,000, all that matters is that we have this moment. Now." He leaned down and kissed her, a slow, tender kiss that held no desperate urgency, only the deep, patient certainty of a love that had already crossed the boundaries of time and reason. It was a kiss that tasted of forever, whatever forever might mean for them. She knew the choice would be the hardest she would ever have to make. But looking up into Julian's ancient, loving eyes, she also knew that she wouldn't be making it alone. Their journey had begun with a lie, a performance for an audience of one. But it had become the most profound truth of her life. And whatever the future held, sun or shadow, a single lifetime or an endless existence, they would face it together. Their love was a quiet rebellion against the rules of both her world and his, a testament to the idea that true connection is not about what you are, but who you are, and that the greatest power of all is the freedom to choose.